By the way, in the Tibetan book of living and dying, if I give you, initially always, there is a kind of a vision there. First 3 chapters about the interplay of life and death, especially first one lays out the ground. Second is contemplation on impermanence and death. Third is going deeper into the understanding meaning of what impermanent is. That's where Milarepa, in horror of death, I took to the mountains, and again I meditated on the uncertainty of hour of death. But then capturing the fortress of the deathless unending nature mind, all fear of death is done and over with. But if everything changes, in horror of death, he took to the mountains and started contemplating on impermanence. Why everything changes? Why is everything impermanent? And then sought to find an answer. Is there anything that is deathless that you can kind of rely on? When you start relying on that slowly, he said, then capturing the fort of the deathless, unending nature mind, all fear of death is done and over. Because what it shows is impermanence revealed to us. If everything dies and everything changes, is there something that we can hang on? In fact, this is the greatest message of the poet Rigpa has said that our deepest fears are like the dragons guarding our deepest treasures. The fear that impermanence wakens in us, that nothing is real, nothing lasts, is, we come to discover, our greatest friend. Because it drives us to ask, if everything dies and changes, then what is really true? Is there something behind the appearances, something boundless, infinite, spacious, something in which the dance of change and permanence takes place? Is there something, in fact, we can depend on, which does survive what we call death? Allowing these questions to occupy us, urgently reflect on them, then we slowly find ourselves making a profound shift in the way we view things. With continued contemplation, practice and letting go, we come to uncover in ourselves something. It's something that I can quote, but it's not something. Something like something substantial, something that we cannot name or describe or conceptualize. In fact, when you talk about shunyata, really, the real meaning of shunyata is every possibility, infinite. It doesn't mean emptiness in the sense of nothingness. It means something unnameable, something that is indescribable, something beyond the conceptual mind, which is the background to everything, in which every possibility is there. That's shunyata. That's actually the true nature of that is actually God. God is that. And so that that's something we cannot name or describe or conceptualize, something that we can begin to realize lies behind all the changes, death, and the death of the world. The narrow desires and distraction to which our obsessive grasping onto permanence has condemned us begin to dissolve and fall away. As this happens, we catch repeated and glowing glimpses of the vast implication behind the truth of impermanence and death. It is as if all our life we've been flying in an aeroplane through the dark clouds and turbulence, when suddenly the plane soars above these into the clear, boundless sky. Inspired and exhilarated by emergence into a new dimension of freedom, we come to uncover a depth of peace, joy and confidence in ourselves that fills us with wonder, breeds in us gradually a certainty that there is in us something, that nothing destroys, that nothing alters, that cannot die. As Tibet's greatest poet and yogi Milarepa, who inspired millions of practitioners, he said, in horror of death, I took to the mountains, and again I meditated on the uncertainty of hour of death, but then capturing the fortress of the deathless, unending nature mind. Now all fear of death is done. Gradually then we become aware in ourselves of the calm and sky-like presence that Milarepa called the deathless, unending nature mind. And as this new awareness begins to become vivid and almost unbroken, there occurs a personal and utterly non-conceptual revelation of what we are, why we are here, how we should act, which mounts in the end to nothing less than a new life, a new birth, you could almost say a resurrection. What a beautiful, what a healing mystery it is that from contemplating continually and fearlessly the truth of change and permanence, we come slowly to find ourselves face to face in gratitude and joy with the truth of changeless, with the truth of deathless, unending nature mind. In fact, the entire Tibetan Book of Living Dying, this particular passage is perhaps the best that I have written. I went over it about 25 times, again, reflected, it came up. And that's at the juncture of next is what is the key that survives death is nature mind, chapter 4, which you should read. There are also stories of how I was introduced, what I realized, which would be interesting for you, which would be very educational. Because I notice in the West, there's not the ABC of spirituality. In fact, the book has been seen by many as, in fact, where I wrote it, because in the West there's no tradition of following a master. So I wrote such a way, I was encouraged by many people to write in first persons, my voice, like a story, a personal journey. And that was very good advice. It opened, because initially it was a little bit uncomfortable to speak that way, because in our tradition we are not allowed to, we don't speak about ourselves. We just speak of the teachings. But I'm told in the West that's so helpful. So since then, I've become more now used to talking about my experience, directly sharing, because I'm not talking about myself, it helps people very much. So then, through this, then you see that really it came to be that actually not only it became like a book, it's actually studied by all religions. Chapter 4 and chapter 5 is meditation. Chapter 6 is about karma, law of cause and effect, about reincarnation. Chapter 7 is about this life, next, pardos, all that. The vision of dreams, sleep practices, all of those. And chapter 8 is part of this life. Yeah, that's right. And chapter 9 is spiritual part, which is about talking about the role of the master, about the really uniting mind with the wisdom mind of the masters. Then chapter 10 is Dzogchen, intrinsic. Then that's the end of life. Then the death begins, dying. Chapter 11 is heart advice for helping to die, which are related with very much hospice, my work with hospice together. That's been used in the hospitals by doctors, many have used that. We have trained many volunteers and many, home carers. And the chapter 12 is the most important on the spiritual care, is about compassion, about giving and receiving. Should be practiced alternately. This alternation should be placed on the medium breath. With in-breath, you take on the suffering of beings with compassion. With out-breath, you give your well-being, happiness to others with love. Practice of love, compassion, love. In fact, great masters, when they die, with the last breath, they take in all the suffering of the world. The out-breath, they bring the happiness, well-being. When I heard this story, then I understood the crucifixion. Because when I was young, I went to study English, and then my mother sent me to a Catholic school, and I had to go to church regularly, say all the Lord's prayers and everything. It was a bit of a culture shock. And why you're kind of like, your Savior is on the cross, If Savior cannot save himself, how can he save you? So that, of course, is the obvious question. So the thing is, then you see, what I realized then with these teachings, that you see, he died on the sin, taking the sins of the world. Through love and through compassion he surrendered. Said to the Lord, not my will, but thy will be done. And then give his salvation through his being. So he is the path. In Christianity, Christ is the path. Is the Guru Yoga, is Christ very much. I had a lot of very deep talks with the contemplative Christian monks about that also. And the thing is that Christ said when he was crucified, he said, forgive them, for they know not what they do. When people harm you, for example, they crucify Christ, they had no idea what the hell they were doing. I mean, incredible. So he said, forgive them. Really, forgive them. Some of the people have no idea. When they come and harm you, you forgive them. For they don't know what they do. So, that's chapter 12. The chapter 13 and 14 is how to prepare spiritually for your death. Then chapter 15 is process of dying. When you die, at the end, not only your body dies, but your ordinary mind, all the delusions die. There comes a moment, this is the greatest moment in the teachings. Normally death is seen as a defeat and a loss, but from a spiritual point of view, death is the greatest moment, is the crowning moment of spiritual life. It's in fact the moment of enlightenment. That's why Buddha, even though he became enlightened, his death is the final enlightenment, called parinirvana. In Tibetan tradition, we celebrate not the birth of masters, we celebrate, of course, with Dalai Lama we celebrate birth, but normally we celebrate their death, because that's the final enlightenment. It is said, as long as you have this physical body, however enlightened you are, it may a little bit limit you. But when this body dies, is the end of that particular chapter, and particularly is that when very special moments, the final moment of death, not only your body dies, but all your mental faculties, ordinary conception, anger, desire, all these die. And then comes what? Then comes the Buddha within you. Because we all have the Buddha nature, and that is actually released. In a glorious way, it's called ground luminosity. The ground luminosity down, extraordinary experience of enlightenment takes place. Then if you've been introduced by the Master in your life, or the nature of mind, and you sustain that in your practice, then at the moment of death, when the ground luminosity happens, it's like a child running into his mother's lap. Child naturally recognizes. Like if I asked you to go and meet somebody like Patrick, you may have not met him, to the airport. He may come right past by you, you'll miss him. But whereas if you've seen him before, of course, that's the best, that direct introduction. If not, if you get teachings on that very likeness, good likeness photograph of him, of recent one, recent nature of mind, not an old experience nature. And then when it comes there, you can recognize it and welcome. So it's a teaching, a child running into mother's lap. And that moment, enlightenment takes place. Many great masters, when they die, they remain in what's called tugdam. They mostly remain 3 days in meditation. In that incredible, there's what body?
Rigor mortis.
Doesn't happen. There's always warmth in the heart. And the color of body very much. When they finally die, sometimes you have to invoke and say, now time for you to retire. And then they die. Then they die. So you remain in meditation. You remain in meditation. When that happens, they've reached the experience of final enlightenment. And in that state, the great master, they do all the work they have not accomplished, they do that. And during that time, if the students of the master pray and unite in mind, one with the master, receive blessings, it's most powerful moment for blessings, is said to be. That's all in the Tibetan Book of Living Dying. If you read again and again, you learn a lot about it. I mean, this book is so received that, for example, there's one great Indian Hindu master called Muktananda. He was very famous. He was a very great master. When he passed away, he had his successor to, I think, man and the boy and the girl, the health. And it seems it's around the time the book came out, and I've heard from many people, whenever people have difficulties and confusion in spiritual path, they will always say, read the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. They give the book. So the book has been followed by people of all religions and none. Because I try to give the ABC of spirituality, the universality of the teachings. Particularly in chapter 21, I talk about the interplay between science, art, Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, about Trinity and the three kayas. So that'd be interesting for you. For those of you who are philosophically inclined, want to do that comparative. And so very much the book has become, I've really aimed at it, because people don't follow the teachings, they have no tradition of following. So I made the book into a living master with a living voice. So there are many people who read my book, follow, particularly in China, others, but they not have met me, but they followed the book like a Bible. Many, many incredible stories. And reading the book again and again, again. Again and again, you hear more. And then in the book, we come to chapter 15, that's the process of dying. 16 is the ground luminosity, this extraordinary experience. Many stories of master who died, like death of my master and many others, which are really living account of that extraordinary experience of ground luminosity. Then chapter 17 is the most spiritual one. That's quite difficult, what happens after death. Then chapter 18 is also even more so. The chapter 19 is very much after death what you do. About us when you have bereavement, when you how to overcome, what practice you do. And then chapter 19. And chapter 20 is the near-death experience relating to Tibetan Book of the Dead. So show the interplay, the experience they speak of in the near-death experience of when the ground luminati, they speak of like almost like meeting with the God.